Hello there, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're joining us for the first time. My name is Emily and I am a dietitian. So my aim from this channel is to just share with you some of my experiences and to disseminate the most accurate, up-to-date, evidence-based dietary information. In my last video we talked about how dietitians might have changed their working style due to the current pandemic, and in this video I just wanted to go into more details specifically on remote working and telephone consultations and give some of my tips that I've worked out and that I've heard other dietitians use to really optimize the way you're working at the moment. So remote working is defined by working away from the traditional environment. So an example I have of this in my own patient care is telephoning the isolation wards to avoid going down there and avoid transmission to other wards and other patients and staff members. This was something that we did more towards the start of the pandemic when it wasn't known how much PPE there was and other things like that, just to really avoid wasting it. So we thought if we can work effectively over the telephone then that would be ideal. So the plan was that we would phone down to the wards and speak with the nursing staff and conduct sort of a thorough assessment, and immediately we ran into some stumbling blocks with this. The main barrier being that the nursing staff are very busy, especially at a time where everything's uncertain. Everyone's a bit on edge. They were very busy, and of course us phoning them and saying, okay, can you get this patient's medical notes, can you get their nursing notes, can you speak to them and ask them how they are, you know, it's just such a burden when usually it would be us going to the wards and collecting that information ourselves. So we did discover some ways to make this more effective. One of them being to ring ahead and book in a time slot to speak with a specific nurse looking after that patient. So you're making sure that they're not going to be on a break, they're expecting your call. They hopefully won't have started anything if they are expecting your call. Obviously the ward is a very dynamic environment, so I appreciate they can't exactly block out that slot if urgent things come up, but it should mean that they are a bit more available or a bit receptive to take your call, and it doesn't come as a surprise to them. You're not interrupting them hopefully in the middle of them trying to do something. Another idea that we had was to develop a Performa, and this isn't something that we actually got around to doing in the end because more information came out about the numbers of PPE, etc. So we were actually visiting the isolation ward. However, initially we did come up with the idea that it would be a lot more helpful to have a Performa. So this is something that we could provide the ward with beforehand and ask the nurse to collect information on the sheet so they know specifically what we're looking for, whether it's the pressure areas or the ward round entry or the weight or food record charts, things like that might be a bit difficult to find on the spot but could be accessed beforehand and filled in. This again, the burden on the nurses, this is in no way a perfect plan because then the burden on the nurses of course is still present. However, it is an idea that we might have taken forward had remote working carried on for a bit longer. Another tip would be to be specific. You can't really afford to waste too much of the nurse's time or your own time for that matter if you are very busy, so be as specific as you can. For example, asking a nurse, oh, can you find me some food record charts, might not be the most helpful because they don't know specifically what they're looking for, whereas if you said, can you find me yesterday's food record chart, it might be a bit more helpful. So being specific about what you're looking for, and for example, instead of saying what did they eat yesterday, maybe saying, okay, did they have breakfast, how much of their breakfast did they eat. We're taught so much to use open questions that it feels really unnatural, but actually if you agree with the nurse beforehand that being direct is a more time effective approach, then it could be something worth trying. So those are my tips for remote working, and I'm gonna move on to talk about telephone consultations. I have just actually rotated from acute into community, which is something that I want to do a whole video talking about my thoughts when I get to the end of my first week. So that will be coming soon. Of course, community we know usually involves things like working with community hospitals, the wards on community hospitals, doing domiciliary visits or home visits, and doing care home visits, as well as outpatient clinics when patients come in to speak to us. So currently I would say all of that is not happening. So the job of a community dietitian is a very different picture to how it might have been a few months ago, as is an acute dietitian. But one thing I've noticed is that the number of telephone reviews and telephone assessments we're doing has skyrocketed infinite amounts, and I'm not sure about everyone else, but telephone consultations is something that kind of scares me. I always think it's not going to be as comfortable as a face-to-face, it's not going to be as useful as a face-to-face. Obviously things like you can't get a weight there and then, you can't get a visual feel for someone, you can't do things like mid-upper arm circumference or hand grip strength. However, I have put together some tips for telephone working and trying to make the best of that, and just how to make it a bit more enjoyable for yourself and for the patient as well. So my first tip is a bit of a basic one, but you'd be surprised how many times I haven't checked, and that is to check the volume is all the way up on the phone. Nothing's more uncomfortable than when the patient and yourself are shouting at each other down the phone. You can't really hear them, they can't really hear you. It's just really awkward. So just do yourself a favour and make sure the volume on the telephone is at full before you call someone. Much like the remote working, I find a Performa is really helpful to help me stay on track. Where I am now in community, they use the program System 1, if anyone's familiar with that, and they have their own templates for dietetic consultations, and since using that the past couple of days it has been absolutely invaluable. It's got a space for diet history, it's got a space for bowels, a space for skin integrity, one for swallowing. I've been finding that really helpful, and I definitely recommend that if your hospital doesn't have one that they use, to maybe ask your line manager whether it would be appropriate for you to develop one. Another tip is to always check personal details. So I'm guilty myself of forgetting to do this, and luckily it's never come back to bite me, but we all fear the day that we will accidentally be having a conversation with a different patient because we haven't checked the date of birth or the address. So it's something that only takes a couple of seconds, but it is so easy to forget. But making sure that when we ring the patient we're saying, oh hi there, do you mind if I just double check your date of birth or the first line of your address? And that can save a lot of confusion and a bit of a mess if it goes wrong. Something I find really helpful with telephone consultations is to have resources open, either sort of physical diet sheets out or to have them open on my computer to go through. This includes anything from a height and weight conversion chart. I know a lot of patients work in stones and pounds and we work in kilograms, so I find that really handy to have open in one window. Obviously the patient's details you'll have in another window. I also find it helpful to have, for example, if I know it's a nutrition support patient and maybe they've got swallowing difficulties and COPD, I will have a, easy to chew options booklet on my desk. I will have a guide for when you've lost your appetite. I will have a food fortification diet sheet, milky drinks recipes, just because I don't trust my memory and I don't trust myself to think very quickly on the spot. So I need to have the resources to hand. So if a patient says, oh, can you just tell me the recipe for fortified milk, for example, how would I make that? I can send you this sheet out after in the post so you have the recipe for your own record. I just find that really useful. And the last one is something I'm sure we all do, but it is to thank the patient at the end. So as much as I'm not the biggest fan of speaking on the phone, I appreciate that the patient might not be as well, and they are giving up a proportion of their day to speak with you, and they might be giving you personal information, and they might have, spent time collecting that information, and I just think it's really nice to end the consultation with a thank you very much for speaking with me today, after of course asking if they've got any questions and things. But I just think it's a nice way to round off the consultation. And there are all the tips I have developed so far for remote working and telephone consultations. If you have any other tips, please do let me know down below in the comments, and I hope we can all learn from each other. If you did find this video informative and helpful in any way, please do give it a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe down below if you haven't already for future videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.